A reading from the Gospel of Mark. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into the human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was asked in the house, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What are you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it into his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Let us pray. Oh God, in our lives, we want to make a difference. We want our lives to have significance, to be worth something when it's all said and done. And in this story today, you give us a clue of how we can do that, how we can be great in your eyes, great in service, great in care for others, great in love. That is your dream for us and for this congregation. So may we hear these words from you today and receive them in our hearts and apply them in our lives every single day of our life to be great in service. Amen. Anybody here like the Olympics? In the summer, next summer about this time, early fall, in Rio de Janeiro, the Summer Olympics will be underway, and that is when we get the answer to the question, who is the greatest at this particular time? For example, who is the greatest sprinter, the world's fastest human? Is it going to be Usain Bolt again, or will it be someone else? Or who's the greatest swimmer? Michael Phelps certainly was that in 2008 when he broke Mark Spitz's old record of 7 gold medals by winning 8, and he won several more at the 12 Olympics. And we know that that gold medal is symbolic of greatness, and those who win it become instant celebrities, sometimes national heroes if they come from a small country and they are the sole winner of the gold. Who's the greatest? Now, sometimes national leaders use the occasion of the Olympics to promote their country as the greatest nation on earth. We saw this in 1936 when the Olympics came to Berlin and Adolf Hitler made them a showcase for Nazism and lifted up his country as the greatest on the earth. We know about, though, at that Olympics there was a young sprinter from Ohio State University, named Jesse Owens, who took on the best that Germany could put up against him in the sprints, and he won 4 gold medals. Or think of the Miracle on Ice in 1980, where the Soviet team, which was basically a professional ice hockey team, took on the Americans made up of college kids, and lo and behold, they were upset by the Americans. It was a huge blow to Soviet prestige. It was a huge uplift to American spirits, which had been down because of the Iranian hostage crisis. Who is the greatest? In the NFL, the greatest team of any given year wins the Lombardi Trophy. In hockey, it's the Stanley Cup. And you know, we love being identified with winners, don't we? You know, if you're an Iowa Hawkeye fan today, are you kind of sitting up a little straighter in your seat? Is your chest out a little more after that exciting win last night? We love to be associated with winners. We buy their stuff, we wear their gear, and we feel better when they win. You ever notice that? We just feel better about life when they win, and not so good when they lose. Sorry, Larry, about the Cyclones last night. Yeah. So here's the question of the week for all of you to talk about. What's your favorite Olympic sport, summer or winter? And do you have a favorite champion of all the champions through the years? I put a couple of them up there that have an Iowa connection. You remember those, Sean Johnson and Gabby Douglas from gymnastics. Okay? Take a moment, move around if you need to. Talk with your neighbor. What's your favorite Olympic sport? Do you have a favorite champion? Well, I'm just curious, what are some of your favorite sports or champions? Anybody? Anybody like swimming? What else? What's that? Women's soccer. Mm-hmm. Very good. Any curling fans here? Yeah, that's a fun sport for you. Yeah, the Olympics are a great time where we, for every 4 years, tune into these. At the first service, somebody said bobsledding, and a lot of us remember as kids going down a hill in a sled or a toboggan, and boy, that's the ultimate sledding sport. Another young boy said ski jumping because he has a Wii at home, and there's a ski jumping game on that Wii, and he loves to pretend that he's a ski jumper. Well, who's the greatest? That's the question for today. And in our gospel story, we overhear a conversation where the disciples think Jesus is maybe out of earshot, and they're debating among the 12 of them, which one of us is the greatest disciple? Now, in this little piece of Mark, there's a pattern going on, if we can have the next slide, please, that says a lot about human nature. In this middle of Mark, right in the middle, there are 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10, where in each chapter Jesus says something very sobering about what's going to happen to him. And we know that story. It's the greatest story ever told. How he went to the cross on our behalf, died on that cross, and then was raised from the dead. But we're on the other side of that story. We know that story well, but the disciples, they didn't know anything about this until he started telling them what was going to happen to him. And 3 times he tells them what's going to happen, and each time it's interesting to look at their response, to see whether they get it or not, and what they do with such news. Last week, you heard the first of the 3 when we heard the story of Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Remember that one? And they say, well, some say you're Elijah and one of the prophets. And then he really hones in and says to the 12, but who do you say that I am? And Peter, filled with the Spirit of God, says the confession that we'll say right after this sermon, we call it a creed. He says, you are the Christ, or you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. But then Jesus says what's on the upper left hand of your screen there. Right after that, he kind of unpacks what it's going to mean to be the Christ or the Messiah. And look what Peter says in response. He kind of pulls Jesus aside and it says, begins to rebuke him. Says, no, you got this all wrong, Jesus. This isn't what we signed up for. Let me tell you how to be a Savior. And look what Jesus does right in return. The same exact word. He rebukes Peter and even says, get behind me. You see that? Get behind me, Satan. He doesn't want Peter to derail him from where he needs to go. Peter, you see, has no room in his head for a Messiah that's going to die on a cross. It's great to follow Jesus when he's winning. You know, when he's turning water into wine and everybody thinks he's great, or when he's feeding 5,000 people with a few loaves and fish. It's great to be associated with him then. But this other stuff, Peter's not so sure. And today you heard the second one in the middle there. Notice how on the left-hand column Jesus says a little more about what's going to happen. What's new here is he says he is going to be betrayed into human hands. I wonder what those disciples thought when they heard that. You know, you typically are betrayed by someone who knows you well. Who knew him better than they? And we know how that story ended. But look at again what goes on in their response. Soon they're arguing over which one of them is the greatest. They don't know quite what to do with this second verse of the same song, you might say. And so they begin to argue which is the greatest. And let's peek ahead now. You aren't going to hear this story read today, but in the third piece, in Mark 10, he says again what's going to happen. And notice what's new there. He's going up to Jerusalem. That's where this passion is going to happen, where the cross is. And look what they say. James and John come forward and say to him, grant to us, it's like a command to Jesus, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. Now remember, back a couple chapters, one last story, and then we'll get out of this conversation. Remember that there was a mountain that Peter and James and John went up to with Jesus. Remember that story? We call it Transfiguration Sunday. It happens every year in February. And he picks these three to go up on the mountain, and there he talks to Moses and Elijah, who appear out of thin air, it seems. And they hear the voice of God say to all of them, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. Then they go down the mountain. Now, if you were one of those three, you'd feel pretty good about yourself, wouldn't you? You'd feel pretty special. Maybe like you're the best. You're the cream of the crop disciple. While that's happening, the other 9 are down in the valley trying to heal somebody, and they can't do it. And maybe these 3 come down and say, well, you know, if you were like us, well, you'd know how to do this. Perhaps James and John were the ones arguing over who is the greatest. It was somebody who was up on that mountain, many, many scholars think. What's going on in this story? Well, to unpack it, let's go to a football field. It can be in Iowa City, it can be in Ames, it can be in Marion, it can be any place. And before the game starts, what do we do in every game? The band comes out, right? They march out to the center of the field, and they play the Star-Spangled Banner. And who leads the band? The drum major, right? Or the drum majorette. Martin Luther King, Jr., on the last Sunday of his life, preached on this very text from Mark chapter 9. And he said words that have been remembered forever, as he says, every one of you and me has within us something called the drum major instinct. The drum major instinct. And he said the disciples in this story had it too. And it's that desire to be out front, the desire to lead the way, to be first in line, like a drum major leading the band down the field. And you know, this is really true. Have you ever wanted to be first in something? Have you ever wanted to be, as a little child, first in line to go from class to somewhere else? You know, you teachers know this, don't you? That there's always this one kid who wants to be the first in line, no matter where you're heading to. That's the drum major instinct. You ever wanted to be part of a team that's number one? You know, what do we do when they show the fans at any college football game? What are they doing? They have their finger up, don't they? We're number one for that day and time. We want to be number one in something often. Or, in this day and age, our parents want that for us. You see this a lot in life. There's nothing wrong with wanting to use your gifts to better the world. But what's wrong, as King says in this quote in the upper left, is letting that drum major instinct get out of control. And the key is to learn how to harness it for good. And that's what this box on the right is. That is from his sermon on that last Sunday of his life. He said, as he went on in his sermon, I want to be remembered as a drum major for justice, a drum major for peace, a drum major for righteousness. And Jesus sums up his little conversation with his disciples by saying the words, whoever wants to be first among you should be last of all and servant of all. There's the key word, servant. And to show them what he meant, there was a little child walking through the house that day, and he picked up that child and put it on its lap and said, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. In this day and age, children, is there anything more precious than young children? Is there anything more important to us as parents than our children or to our society? But in that day, children were held in low esteem. They had no rights. They had no privileges. They were very vulnerable. They were powerless. If you want to know what children were like then, just tune on the TV and look at what's happening with all these refugees coming into Europe. Watch for the children. That's a picture of the child that Jesus was scooping up that day in his arms. And what he's saying is, not just be nice to children, but rather greatness consists in caring for the vulnerable and the powerless and those who are like defenseless children. Give yourself to these, and you will be great. Next Sunday morning, we will have a great person here speaking to you. His name is Clint Tweet Ball. He is the co-founder and the director of Matthew 25. And they take the words of today's gospel and also of Matthew 25 in the Bible. Go home and read that chapter. And they make it live. Let's hear a little bit right now about what they do through a video, please. If we can have that, Ron.
In 2006, when Courtney and I helped start Matthew 25, we didn't have money and we didn't have a strategic plan.
We began with the idea that if we gave people opportunities to act on their belief, that would set the stage for transformation.
That hunch has been confirmed again and again. Believe, act, transform.
One of our first programs was Book Buddies at Taylor School. Mentors spent time every week one-on-one with first graders who struggled with reading. We believed in the kids. We acted to help them become better readers. When we did this, reading scores improved dramatically. More importantly, we got to know the kids. We heard from them about the challenges they face. Our commitment to act deepened. It's one thing to talk about poverty, but knowing a child living in poverty has transformed my life.
This is the Time Check neighborhood, just north of Taylor. During the 2008 flood, it was underwater.
It was the worst natural disaster in Cedar Rapids history. Still, people here believed in this neighborhood. Thousands of volunteers also believed and helped rebuild. Matthew 25 joined with them and 2 partner organizations to create the Block by Block program. Together, we transformed this neighborhood 1 block at a time.
25 blocks were rebuilt, 300 homes were restored.
My husband and I were among the first to move back after the flood. When we had finally rebuilt enough to get back into our house, we started to notice how empty the neighborhood was. No more kids playing on the sidewalks, abandoned houses all around. It was a little scary. I was pregnant at the time, and honestly, we had some second thoughts about whether we should stay here to raise our family. Block by Block helped us believe that things could really improve. They helped people restore their homes and connect with each other. And now our neighborhood is full. We have a second child, and we truly believe that this is a great place to raise kids.
We believed in Katie and her neighbors. This belief and the shared actions of many transformed this neighborhood.
Unfortunately, in some places, homes couldn't be rebuilt. We looked at this area and thought we can put a farm here and teach everyone how to grow food. We can use food to rebuild neighborhoods.
Last year, there were abandoned houses right here. And this year, through hard work and thousands of volunteer hours, we are creating an urban farm, a treasure right here in the heart of Cedar Rapids.
This is the fun part. I enjoy the creative energy and enthusiasm of people acting on their beliefs. Truly amazing things happen when volunteers, donors, and residents work together. Lives and neighborhoods are transformed.
Matthew 25 still has a lot of work to do. Kids to help educate, neighborhoods to help rebuild, a farm to grow.
At the core of everything is the conviction that when passionate people act on their belief in God, belief in kids, belief in their community, powerful transformation happens.
Matthew 25 does transformative work because of you. Your prayers, your volunteering, your financial support. All of these make a huge impact. Today, we ask you to step forward, act upon your belief that together our actions will transform lives.
So again, come back next week and hear about this great organization from a great man, Clint Tweetball. Please stand as we continue with our creed and prayers.